Thank you for joining us. We are really glad to have you here today for the webinar, Renewable Energy Ecology in the Northeast. Since this is a lunchtime program, please feel free to enjoy your lunch as you listen/zoom in. Today's session will focus on grassland bird ecology and solar array development in New York. Our presenters will be sharing preliminary findings from their ongoing research, including insights into how solar energy development is influencing bird communities during both the breeding and non-breeding seasons. We'll also explore the role of working lands in supporting grassland bird populations and hear about emerging best management practices for conserving these species amid rapid land use changes. So thank you again for being here. And Sarah, you can go to the next slide. So this webinar is being hosted by the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative, which is a partnership designed to help Regional Conservation Partnership Network members connect with bird conservation experts and resources. Our goal is to support and expand land protection efforts, strengthen partnerships, and advance ecological priorities by implementing eBird and habitat projects across forests and grasslands in New England and the Mid-Atlantic. My name is Katie Blake, and I'm a regional conservationist with Highstead, a conservation and ecological stewardship nonprofit based in Redding, Connecticut. I also serve as the co-coordinator for the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative, along with my colleague Sarah Barker of the Cornell Land Trust Bird Conservation Initiative. She will introduce herself and share a little bit more about the initiative in just a minute. Today's program is part of our ongoing webinar series that brings practical conservation tools, resources, and guidance to practitioners working at the intersection of bird conservation, land protection, and community engagement. And we'll share a link in the chat where you can find recordings from our past webinars, and feel free to reach out if you have any ideas that you'd like to see covered in future webinars. Next slide. So for today's agenda, we're going to begin with a brief overview of the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative to help set the stage. And after that, I'm going to introduce our presenters who will offer a broader global context around land use changes and intersection with bird communities and bird habitat, and share their preliminary findings from their research. Their presentation will run for about an hour, and we'll have about 20 minutes for questions and discussion that we're going to save at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn over to my co-host, Sarah, to tell you more about the Bird Initiative.
Thanks, Katie. So as she mentioned, I'm Sarah Barker, and I work at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and I am the program director for the Land Trust Bird Conservation Initiative, which brings together bird partners and land trusts throughout the country, really teaching and training land trusts and partner organizations how to put birds to work to further their conservation mission and land protection goals. So this program has built a comprehensive website with a fundraising and bird resource directory, including success stories and case studies. We also offer a grant program that provides seed funding, technical advice, and partnership development to our awardee community. We give workshops throughout the country, and we educate the private lands community about how to use birds and bird tools and data to support land conservation and planning efforts. So we also build what we call conservation collaboratives. This is by bringing clusters of regional or neighboring land trusts and bird partners together around a common set of goals to focus conservation efforts on high priority places and birds where protection and management are most needed, but also where it can be most effective. And since birds aren't restricted to political boundaries, they really make great tools to help build these relationships and scale these types of partnerships into regional efforts. So we have 6 active collaboratives, which operate in grasslands of Maine and Virginia, in fire-adapted longleaf pine ecosystems of the Southeast, early successional and young forest habitats in Vermont and New York, and then also forest lands of Western Washington. And our 6th collaborative is called the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative, and this is what's hosting our webinar today. So it operates within this regional conservation partnership network, really connecting RCPs with bird conservation partners such as Audubon groups. So our RCPs are shown on this map to the right. They're informal yet organized and diverse networks of partners from public and private entities such as land trusts, government agencies, producer associations, and academic institutions. And they form around a shared region of interest, such as a watershed or a multi-state area. And then partners within an RCP work together across boundaries to accomplish landscape scale conservation projects. So the NBHCI provides technical expertise and resources, such as the online checklist program eBird, to enable RCP partners to interact with birds and bird organizations in ways that advance and expand land protection goals and ecological priorities, while scaling projects regionally that support species of conservation concern and their habitats in these Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states. So we have three goals that drive this process. So the first is to build collective knowledge and consciousness about the importance of birds for RCP's work, and to demonstrate and create awareness of how bird conservation can help advance regional priorities and be used successfully to assist with private land planning and protection. So this is really how we insert birds into the equation and how they can help move ahead these conservation efforts. For example, the NBHCI is part of what we call the Uplands to Lowlands Climate Resilient Core and Connectors RCPP. So this was awarded over $6 million to support land protection and restoration projects, as well as outreach on a regional scale through a partnership of 3 of these RCPs. And through this grant, the NBHCI has hired an eBird outreach contractor to give 6 workshops within this RCP community and try to develop an eBird train the trainer curriculum over the next 2 years. So our second goal is to educate and train partners to use eBird and encourage and support RCP members in adopting this participatory science program as a tool for activities such as monitoring and planning and land prioritization and engaging communities. So our partners also expressed a need to identify lands that are important for breeding birds in the US, and this is combined with data that show protected lands and climate resiliency. So we built an interactive ArcGIS web map with 4 bird layers that are derived from eBird modeled bird abundance data. This is combined with land conservation data layers to look at the highest value habitats to help increase local and regional conservation impact. And then our third goal is to improve, conserve, and manage habitats through a series of implementation projects that support declining populations of bird species of concern in forests, working lands, also in the grasslands of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. This is to protect and steward private lands for these target birds by putting managed or restored acres on the ground. So to date, the NBHCI has supported bird-friendly practices such as forest management recommendations and implementation on about 1,800 forested acres and over 4,000 acres of grasslands. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Katie to introduce our speakers for today and to get us started.
Thanks, Sarah. It's now my honor to introduce today's speakers. Dr. Stephen Grodsky is the Assistant Unit Leader with the U.S. Geological Survey's New York Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit and an assistant professor at Cornell. He is a broadly trained applied ecologist and sustainability scientist. He specializes in the emerging field of renewable energy ecology, which is the study of interactions among energy development, ecosystems, and people. Trifosa Simomora is a PhD candidate in the Department of Natural Resources in the Environment at Cornell University. She's interested in modeling grassland birds' occupancy and sustainable grassland habitat management in New York State. And Timothy Boycott is a 4th-year PhD candidate in the Department of Natural Resources and the Environment at Cornell. His research and professional experience centers on better understanding wildlife responses to environmental dynamics as a way of making conservation recommendations. And just a note that Timothy had an unavoidable conflict for part of the webinar today, but does plan to join for the Q&A and discussion. Dr. Grotsky and Trifosa will be presenting the team's collective research. And if you also have any questions while they're presenting, we ask that you share them in the chat as they come up and the presenters can respond either after they're presenting or during the Q&A. Dee, over to you.
Great. It was really interesting to learn about what y'all are doing. I was sparking some ideas in my mind for sure. Trifos is going to bring up our slide deck here. So I just wanted to give y'all a brief introduction to this concept of renewable energy ecology and how it particularly has evolved with avian conservation in my experience to sort of set the stage, and then I'll also provide some concluding statements about how folks can get more involved with the research that we're doing, particular to grassland birds and solar energy development in New York State, which I think a lot of these preliminary results can extend to other areas in the Northeast, given the landscape similarities. So as Katie mentioned, renewable energy ecology, it's a study of interactions. So it's really important that we understand that everything is interacting. And historically, energy has been separate from the environment, and that has resulted in some unfortunate unintended consequences, right? And so we have a second opportunity to reevaluate how conservation, wildlife conservation, sustainability, to use a broader term, the idea of maintaining natural resources into the future, how that can interface with renewable energy development, which is a complex system in the sense that renewable energy mitigates climate change, which is good in the sense of, wildlife and lots of other things as well. Birds, right? Climate change studies have shown can affect birds. But we also need energy as people, apparently, unless we all want to start living barefoot down by the river, eating raw brook trout. So I think the idea is that this energy transition is happening, and there's economic inertia. There are some regulations and laws in place, and I'll talk a little bit about the New York Climate Act. So there are things where fossil fuels are finite, right? And renewable energy is happening. It's going to continue to happen. It's integrated into energy portfolios that are diverse, but nevertheless, we see changes happening on the landscape, and this has been happening for quite some time. So a few examples that I can share with you, just kind of chartering the evolution of my understanding of renewable energy ecology. Birds have always been a part of that. Starting off with wind energy in the Midwest, and a lot of that was focused on mortality and things of that nature in terms of birds and bats. But one common theme that sort of resonates throughout this idea of renewable energy ecology is land use change, right? And so the idea is that the footprints of renewable energy are larger from a localized perspective, right? Not necessarily a life cycle assessment, but solar energy facilities, wind energy facilities, they take up large swaths of land, right? Relative to largely subterranean local extraction of fossil fuels. Of course, there are, again, things that happen throughout the cycle that can exacerbate issues, but the land use change is really a major driver. And moreover, there's potential for habitat displacement, habitat loss, habitat alteration, creation of new habitats and niches. And so it's a very interesting space to be working in, because there are surprises sometimes, in terms of how species interact with renewable energy development. But the idea is it's happened for decades now. We've been thinking about birds and wind energy. I also studied birds in early successional vegetation communities in these private forest industry lands when forest bioenergy was getting really big in North Carolina around 2014, 2015, 2016 there. a lot of wood pellets being exported to the European Union. And so the idea is that there's woody biomass being harvested. How is that interfacing with avian communities in the breeding season and in the winter, which I like to remind my grad students that I did winter field work as well, although it was in North Carolina and Georgia. But the idea is that there can be these kind of interesting spaces where the renewable energy aspect adds another layer onto, your what I would call traditional kind of wildlife habitat relationships, avian habitat relationships that can be really interesting to try to understand. So most recently, what's happening in the Northeast and a lot of other areas as well, with the advent of advanced photovoltaic solar technology, we're seeing a lot of solar energy development happening. There's still some wind, a lot of more so smaller scale distributed wind projects, a lot of the wind development in the Northeast in terms of mountaintops and things like that. There's only so many spaces. Offshore wind, that's a whole nother issue. That being that y'all are land trusts, I assume you're tangentially interested in that. Same thing with floating solar. So in the Northeast, we've leveraged eBird actually to better understand potential interactions with water birds and floating solar development. Which brings me to a point where you can kind of conceptualize this research into two general bins, one being predictive modeling, that's more on the lines of environmental geography, understanding potential for land use change, trying to predict that. And that's where I think a lot of our research can come into play to help partners prioritize lands that might be high value to, say, grassland birds in New York, but also, as you might guess, where grassland birds are at, it turns out those are great places to put solar. It's open areas, relatively flat. So there are also these energy models that were melding with biodiversity and social models in a geospatial context to understand current and future land use change. That's one thing that I think we're not going to get into in detail today, but something that we can talk more about into the future and how land trusts can get involved in that. The second phase would be to say, hey, like it's cool to understand at a general level land use change, what might happen, but let's go and zoom in and get in there and actually study things on the ground. And that's where, in partnership with the DEC, our grassland bird project really came into focus, where we can better understand at a localized level what the interactions are between grassland birds and solar energy development, and answer questions like, is grassland bird habitat and solar development mutually exclusive? What are the different interactions? How can management be interfacing with grassland bird conservation and solar development from a localized level all the way out to a landscape level? And so just hoping to give you a little bit of context for where we're coming from, where the idea is, whether it's floating solar or terrestrial solar in the Northeast, there's high potential for both, and things are starting to emerge where there are novel interactions. And that's really what we're trying to better understand so we can provide unbiased scientific information to managers and stakeholders to inform their process. And so today, what we're going to do is zoom in on grassland bird conservation and solar energy in the Northeast, which is a project that's led by two of my PhD students, Trifosa and Tim. And the idea is you can think of this as sort of a nexus where we have agriculture, grassland bird conservation, and solar energy development. And these things are interacting from local to landscape levels. It's very new. We're trying to understand that in real time to again, conserve birds while also being realistic about meeting energy requirements and social aspects. We need agricultural land for food, but at a more specific level, there's this really interesting interface, and Trifosa will share some of the results from my postdoc. We have a paper coming out shortly, but essentially, no matter how you swing it, whether you prioritize cost or biodiversity or preserving, well, I shouldn't say preserving prime ag land, but in most cases, when you're trying to find those win-win scenarios, hay and pasture land is always coming up as the top of the highest potential for interaction or conversion, if you will, to solar. And of course, that has implications for grassland birds on these working lands. And the last thing I'll mention is that we are able to divide at this point our assessment into working lands and sort of these what we're calling protected lands, which are essentially state and federal lands that are managed for grassland birds, right? But we know that private lands are where the solar development can occur. At this point, we're not seeing it happening on public lands to any great extent, or maybe not at all, in the Northeast. And so that's where, again, this whole concept of land trust, and we are working with some for our current project, comes into play, because the acquisition of land or the prioritization of different parcels of land and how that land is interfacing at a broader context in terms of either mitigation for grassland birds and solar, or habitat displacement, or potentially not. We're trying to figure that out. And so that's where we're at now. I'll mention that these results are preliminary, and we're running analyses now. We're done with field work, and Trifosa will go into all the details on that. But we're happy to be presenting this information and hopefully stimulating some ideas and conversation about this concept of renewable energy development and avian conservation in the Northeast. So Trifosa, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Steve. I'm very happy to be here, and then Steve is already giving very nice general idea and also what we are doing in Renewable Energy Ecology Lab. And we are also very thankful to Kathy, Sarah, and Meg preparing for this webinar to happen. So let's dive into the presentation. So always for the conservation, there is dual crisis. We are experiencing right now a biodiversity loss that is already happening at a staggering number, starting at 1970s. And then also the climate change, that it's kind of like two things that happening at the same time, they probably interacting. And then this is also will be affecting the conservation effort or management effort in general, because that's affecting the population, and then it's impacting how the species actually responds and react towards this. As already mentioned by Steve, in New York State, we have actually one of the tagline, the aim is like trying to also counter the energy crisis. And then we are having a plan for New York State is basically 70 by 30. So meaning like 70% of our energy sourced from renewable energy by 2030. So to achieve that aim, there will be a lot of land conversion and also land habitat change because of some of these land are needed to be converted into solar. So this is the map of New York State, and as you can see, the smaller dot is the New York Solar Energy Renewable Development Application process in 2023 for less than 5 megawatts, and then diamond is the more than 25 megawatts, and then this is the solar project application at that time. Some of them are already being built, some of them are not, and then I think Steve already giving a very good mention about the private land or the land that it can be actually occurring for the solar renewable energy is also important to look at. But as you can see in here, it's quite widespread and almost in all over the region of New York State, because it needs to achieve those targets for 2030. And in here, I want to show you about how the upstate New York, especially landscape look like. In here, we can see a fragmentation of type of lands. We have agricultural matrix. We also have denser vegetation, trees, and then city. And then among this type of land, we have solar coming in. That is like really a new type of land that will be emerging more and more as we try to achieve the 30 by 70 target. Now, the solar energy development in New York, Steve already mentioned this a little bit. So we have in our lab, Adam Gallagher, who's like doing some study about from all of the sites of the solar already being built, what was the land cover before that being solar? So this is a graph showing you the y-axis is the type of the land and the x-axis is the area of the land. And then it's basically the first one that being converted most of the time is the grassland or pasture area, especially in New York State. The second one is cultivated crops. And then Steve already also mentioned a little bit about this. This is about the scenario of what type of land that will be get converted if you make three different scenarios. The first one, if you're trying as a solar company, if you're trying to minimize costs, what type of land that you will convert most for developing the solar project. The first will be grassland area or pasture. And then the second is like conserving biodiversity. So when you're trying to conserve biodiversity, you still look at the grassland or pasture to do the conversion. And then also when you're trying to preserve the agriculture, the agriculture for supplying our food, it still also need to convert most of the pasture, our pasture or grassland area. So this is a kind of like a reality that we have and experiencing right now. Well, the current solar that already being built, in the past it was a grassland or pasture, and then the one that projected to be built will also be impacting a lot of our pasture or grassland area. And in here, I'm going to also show you about the grassland habitat declines and also the grassland bird declines. This is a map of USDA rangeland analysis platform, showing in here the grassland extent in 1992, and then how it is now look like in 2021. We see a lot of grassland range loss, and then a lot of that losing the connection in terms of habitat. And then this is actually largely losses of working non-native grassland, like when European settlers coming in, and then it's mainly for the hayfields or pasture lands. And then what that will impact to our actually grassland birds population, which depended on this type of habitat, we are seeing that the grassland birds is actually declining 53% compared to 1970. And then this decline is even more severe compared to the forest land and the shorebirds. And then that is why the DEC, which is Department of Environmental and Conservation of New York State, they are making and creating a regulation to protect 11 grassland obligate species. That is very important, and then they are very much dependent on the grassland habitat. In here, I'm going to tell you who they are, like short-eared owl, northern harrier. This is two types of raptors that also overwintering in New York State. We have upland sandpiper, sedge wren, hansel sparrow, hornlark, vesper sparrow, grasshopper sparrow, bobolink, eastern meadowlark, and savanna sparrow. The reason I'm mentioning this because these 11 species will be important for the next slides of our analysis. So our research objectives, we basically wanting to know and assess the impact of solar energy development on the avian assemblages and grassland birds in the breeding season during the summer. And then we are also wanting to assess the impacts of solar energy development, again, on avian assemblages and grassland birds in the non-breeding season, which mean winter season. And then we're also trying to compare the current best management practices for grassland bird conservation. Some of the results that we can share today is preliminary. It doesn't mean it's not true, but we can even go deeper after doing much more deeper analysis and modeling. But what we can show today is the comparison between different types of avian assemblages and then the proof or evidence of the management practice impact towards the grassland bird conservation. And how do we achieve that? So we basically going through 3 different regions in New York State. We have sampled area in North region, West Central region, and then also East region. And we're making sure we're sampling an area that is for grassland bird conservation area defined. And then in here, we have working grassland sites, which is the blue dot, the blue triangle. And then the square red is solar array and solar adjacent grassland sites. And then the green dot is protected BMP grassland. And then in here, I'm showing you how it looks like. So this is the working grassland, usual type of extractive agricultural practices where the hayfield is being planted for the dairy production for the cattle. And then it's also extractive in terms of like it need to be hayed throughout the season to collect the grasses. And then in here, we're showing the solar development patch and solar adjacent working grassland to actually see how different in terms of spatial structure and proximity to the solar sites. And then is there still any grassland birds actually occupying the solar adjacent type of working grassland? So it's immediate to the right of the solar array that we are sampling in here. And then number 4 is like the protected pest management grassland conservation lands. Steve already mentioned about DEC having some land being managed for this. Land Trust also have some area for this. And we also went and sampled in Finger Lake National Forest, Saratoga, Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge. We collaborate with several state agencies. And we're very thankful that they give us permission to go and sample those sites. So, and what are we doing in terms of sampling? So we're doing field work. Basically, we're doing bird surveys. We're doing point counts, passive acoustic monitoring, and then also spot mapping. And then in terms of habitat surveys, we are doing vegetation community survey. And then we're also doing patch level and land scale level land cover and composition. And then we're also going to combine the New York land cover data and then also the crop cover data to see the spatial configuration impact towards the birds. For this specific presentation, we're going to focus on the point counts. So we are doing this field work starting from 2023, summer 2023, all the way to summer 2025. And then we're also doing the winter survey during winter 2023-2024 and winter 2024 to 2025. So that is how we collect our samples. So now we're going to the first question. How does solar energy development impact the general avian community during the breeding season? Now, so we have 4 different types of treatments of land types that we are sampled, but now I want to shift our focus more into the gradient of solar development. To the left in here, we are seeing the existing open lands, like basically the working land that we have in New York State, and this is usually privately owned. And then this is subject to conversion to the solar, and they might be converted or they already being converted. During our survey period, almost half of our working grassland actually will be converted into solar. And then the second is solar adjacent open lands. So the one that I mentioned before, working grassland immediate to the solar arrays. And then the third one is like highly modified utility scale solar arrays. So now we're wanting to understand how the general avian community actually being impacted by these different type of gradient of modification in the landscape. First, we're looking at the species richness, Hill-Shannon and Inver-Simpson. And then we are using the estimated mean average within effort replication sampling. And then we have in the x-axis is the type of the gradient. So we have solar array, solar adjacent working grassland, and then working grassland. So first is species richness. It's basically just the number of unique species you find in the avian community where we are doing our point counts. And this is specifically, we are only including the birds that actually doing something in that patch, in the place that we are surveying. And we're also doing behavioral code for this. So first, for species richness, we're seeing that solar array is highly, much more lower compared to the working grassland and solar adjacent working grassland, showing that it's less in terms of biodiversity value for the species richness. For Hill-Shannon is looking more at the differences between the rarer species. And we see that the solar array is much more, again, showing the same pattern, that is less biodiversity, less biodiverse, less number of species you can find compared to the working grassland. And then sort of the solar adjacent working grassland is kind of like intermediate between both sides. And Infer Simpson is looking at more at the general species. In here, the difference is in not really striking, but we can still see the same pattern of the solar array having less number compared to the working grassland. Now, if we wanting to see diversity gradients in terms of the hill salmon, so we dig deeper into like what the predicted model or the slope of what you can find if you have a solar array. So this is the slope that you can see. And then here, if you adding the solar adjacent working grassland, you have much more higher probability or higher chance in terms of getting more abundant of species. And then now, even with the working grassland, you have higher species. This is for general IFN communities that we found in the field. So basically, in terms of like doing conversion or the siting system, it has to be carefully selected. If your site is already high in terms of diversity, then you will lose more of that species. Compare if you are doing conversion in a site or in a working grassland, quote unquote, that is already very low numbering species, because you might be losing more species if it's actually high quality grassland habitat sites. And then now for the avian community, we're also doing some kind of habitat association analysis. So we're looking at the habitat association of this general avian community. We have forest type, grassland type, shrubland types, woodland type or open canopy type of birds, aquatic type, which is mainly wetland with the red-winged blackbird and common yellowthroat. And in here, again, we're seeing that the solar array, interestingly, having higher, more forest-associated species you can find in solar array, but it's significantly not for the working grassland. So working grassland type of species that actually in there is mostly like more common in the working grassland, more or less in the working grassland than in the solar array for forest type of species. For grassland type of species, it's good to see the pattern also still hold that the working grassland, in the working grassland, you have more grassland birds associated habitat species compared to the solar array. In the shrubland, again, inverted pattern like in the forest, shrubland associated species is much more common in solar array than in the working grassland. In the woodland, we're finding that woodland species that associated with woodland is much more common in the working grassland compared to the solar. And then for aquatic, there's significant differences between the working grassland and solar adjacent working grassland. This is showing that species that actually associated with grassland habitat, that they're really being much more impacted towards the solar type of habitat, so that there are less of them in the grassland like this one. So from here, we're also trying to look at the population trend, the population trajectories of the avian community. So to the x-axis, if you wanting to see and then, like check based on their projection of are they increasing population, stable population, and declining population. So 1 is if they're increasing, 5 is if they are declining, and then the y-axis is the predicted mean abundance. The red is solar, the yellow is solar adjacent, and then the green is working grassland. Again, in here, I wanting to shift our attention towards the number 5, which is the declining population. We see some significant differences between the working grassland type of species that actually in the working grassland compared to the solar array. That this is showing that even in terms of general avian assemblages, what we found using our point count methods, the grassland birds actually experiencing decline, and then also less number of them in solar array. Now we're shifting our gear a little to how does solar energy development interact with grassland bird conservation? during the breeding season. So this is focusing more into the 11 grassland bird species being protected by DEC, Department of Environmental and Conservation in New York. So again, I want to refresh our memory about we have 4 different type general treatments that we are selecting. We have utility scale solar arrays, solar adjacent working grassland, and then we have existing open lands, working grassland, and protected grassland. Again, the protected grassland is the one that will not subject to conversion, but the working grassland will be converted in the near future. That will be the scenario. So now here we are going to show you what it is look like for the avian community structure by doing non-metric dimensional scaling. So in layman term, this is basically just mapping the community structure based on the number of individuals, and it is being compared to different type of habitat. And we have in here the black dot is solar adjacent working grassland, purple BMP grassland, red working grassland, and yellow solar array. And then in here, I'm going to mention how the solar, the yellow one, is completely separated from BMP type of or protected grassland. So there's definitely some management influence and also the presence of the animals or the bird conservation, the 11 conservation species that is present in BMP compared to the solar. And also working grassland kind of in the intermediate between them. And then the solar adjacent working grassland is just overlapping between 3 of them. So there's some kind of like a gradient of level of disturbance. And that is also being apparent in terms of our 11 obligate grassland species that being in a state New York level being protected. Now, we saw them in terms of mapping, but how are they showing up in terms of the list of the species that constitute of that community, basically? So this is a rank abundance. It's simply we are looking at the most abundant species, and then we rank them based on from the most abundant to the less abundant species. Again, this is for general treatment that we are having: solar adjacent, BMP grassland, working grassland, and solar array. Look at the BMP grassland in here. We have very high number of bobolink, 800 individuals. And then this is savanna sparrow, eastern meadowlark, northern harrier, grasshopper sparrow, Hansel sparrow, Szechuan, and vesper sparrow. And then interestingly, in the working grassland, we still see almost the same type of species composition, but bobolink is like half the size compared to the BMP grassland. So they're much more individual in BMP grassland than in working grassland. And one species that is distinctly only in working grassland is hornlark. And then now, how about the solar array and solar adjacent working grassland? So in solar adjacent working grassland, we found actually savanna sparrow, bobolink, eastern meadowlark, and hornlark are actually they still using or they can use this type of habitat. But interestingly, we also saw in solar array, savanna sparrow, eastern meadowlark, and bobolink. But further analysis need to be cautioned in here because some of the species are having high site fidelity, meaning they're being born in that site this year. The next year they probably come back again, not knowing that it's already being converted into solar. But also maybe there is some kind of evidence of spillover effect coming from the solar adjacent because that is still good working grassland. But as we can see in here, the working grassland, BMP grassland, holds more of the protected species compared to the solar and solar adjacent working grassland. And in here, I'm just showing you the red is the threatened species, and then the yellow one is the special concern for New York State. Now, we are also wanting to show you about the species occurrence patterns. We are evaluating this using the recording, the passive acoustic monitoring, which can increase our temporal ability to actually monitor their activity throughout the breeding season. So in x-axis, we have the month of our recording started, and then in y-axis is the mean daily detection. We're choosing savanna sparrow and bobolink in here, and then the green is protected grassland, the yellow is working grassland. Here we're showing the savanna sparrow in terms of their total mean daily detection, showing that they are arriving more abundance in the working grassland, less in the protected grassland, and then they breed and then they increase in terms of their activity because it's breeding season, and they're going down because they're also migrating back. But for working grassland, it seems like we can see some kind of like disturbance in here in during the peak of the breeding season, and then they breed again. So savanna sparrow has been known as like they try to breed twice or thrice if the first one failed. So we can see in here a sign or an evidence of kind of disturbance because working grassland is still actively haying, actively doing agricultural activities. But comparing to boboling, we're seeing in protected grassland, again, holding the same pattern through with the rank abundance. It's very high in protected grassland, and they breed and then they leave. And then compared to the working grassland, they are very high also, but then they're going down very quickly. So boboling only breed once. So if they fail to breed once during the summer, they will not try to breed again. So this is also something that need to be considered as a land manager if you have working grassland or the type of management trying to not disturb this type of species, especially boboling. The reason we're showing this, just want to show that just from 2 of the species of 11 being protected, they have species-specific needs during the breeding season and to make sure their breeding is actually successful. Now we're shifting our gears towards how does solar energy development impact the general avian community during the non-breeding season. This is a picture taken by me during the winter 2025. This is one of our sites that we are selected to see what type of species or birds are actually still occupying this type of land during winter. Why it is important? Because the winter season is harsh. There's less food. There's scarce of also prey, and then this is very important for them to stay and able to survive during winter season so that they can continue carrying over towards the breeding season for the next year. And some of the winter sites is also being protected for our overwintering raptor species, which is northern harrier and short-eared owl. That is also obligate grassland species. Now we are looking at the mapping again, the same type of analysis, non-metric dimensional scaling. Now the yellow is BMP grassland, the blue triangle is working grassland, the cube is solar adjacent green, and then diamond shaped red is solar. So I'm showing you in here that's very interesting. The yellow one to the left is the BMP grassland, and it's quite totally separated with the solar, even though this is during the winter. So the pattern still holds true, and then there seems some kind of like the BMP grassland keep being the most different in terms of structure compared to the other type of sites. And then there's a lot of overlapping between solar adjacent and then working grassland and then also the solar sites. Now we're learning also the map showing its differences, but what the species composition look like in terms of rank abundance. So in here for BMP grassland, we're showing just the 10 most abundant species. You see American crow, European starling, rough-legged hawk, northern harrier, American robin. And if we compare to working grassland, we saw that it is much more steeper curve, meaning it's like less even community. So it's already like we see there's huge gap between American crow to European starling in working grassland. And then we saw horned lark in here, red-tailed hawk, blue jay, Canada goose. But how about solar adjacent and solar sites? We saw American crow, European starling, and huge jump all the way to red-tailed hawk, meaning that it's really not even community. Meaning that we can roughly saying that there is less number of species that can be supported by solar adjacent compared to the working grassland and BMP grassland. And then in solar, the huge jump is American crow, European starling, all the way to Canada goose. And then it's like really less number of species kind of even in terms of evenness because it's very steeper curve. So we can see the gradient of how the community of avian in here really being affected together by different type of habitat that they are occupying or being present with. Now we are specializing and then filtering more detail into winter raptor communities. Why it is important? Because the winter raptor is like the highest in the birds' food chains. So it's important to see how well they're adapting towards this situation. I'm showing you the number or the winter raptor that we found during our winter fieldwork. And in here is even more striking differences in terms of like population and the community. So we have BMP grassland definitely separated with the working grassland, solar adjacent, and then solar sites. Now we are looking at the rank abundance to see how and what is composing of the species in terms of raptor species. So in BMP grassland, we have rough-legged hawk, northern harrier. This is good because this is a protected species. We want to see it here. Red-tailed hawk, short-eared owl. This is protected species. American kestrel, bald eagle, hornlark, and Cooper's hawk. Sorry about hornlark there. But in working grassland, we have red-tailed hawk. The first one, red-tailed hawk has been known as a generalist, more generalist type of raptor. And then we have bald eagle down there, but as you can see, the curve is getting steeper for the working grassland compared to the BMP. And then solar adjacent, we have red-tailed hawk again, and then huge jump all the way, just starting the next one. Most common is turkey vulture, and then hornlark. Sorry to put hornlark in here, actually. And then solar, we have again the red-tailed hawk, and then huge jump to American kestrel, rough-legged hawk. So even in here, the same structure hold, and then we see more generalist type of raptor, much more common in solar adjacent and solar sites compared to the BMP grassland and working grassland. So now we are looking at how does the solar energy development impact the response of threatened northern harrier and endangered short-eared owl towards during non-breeding season, which means during the winter. So we are looking in here for the year of winter survey. 2023 is blue, and then 2024 is yellow, and then the X is here is the treatment type, just the 4 general types of treatment we have, and then Y-axis is the predicted raptor abundance. This is a model using generalized mixed model, and what we're seeing in here, like the huge number of raptor of species of northern harrier and short-eared owl in BMP grassland compared to the working grassland and solar adjacent. Now, using BMP grassland as baseline, northern harrier and short-eared owl are significantly 93% fewer at solar sites compared to BMP grassland, 91% fewer at solar adjacent sites, and significantly 86% fewer in working grassland compared to BMP grassland. We're seeing here much more stronger avoidance, if you might say, in terms of like northern harrier, short-eared owl towards the solar adjacent if you compare them evenly between sites. Because yes, they can still, especially northern harrier, they can still go to solar and then doing some kind of foraging. But if you compare them in terms of general sites that we're sampling, it's totally lower and significantly lower compared to the BMP grassland. So now this is the type of behavior that they're showing for northern harrier and short-eared owl. We are looking when we are surveying them, we're also noting down what behavior they are showing. Are they focalizing, foraging, interaction, perching, and roosting? And then the y-axis is the treatment type of land, and then the rate of the behavior. I'm sorry, that they're showing. So we have in here again the foraging is shown very high in BMP grassland, showing that there is much more food availability in terms of type of habitat that they're occupying at a time. And then they're also showing foraging in the solar. But compared to short-eared owl, we have no occurrence of short-eared owl at all in the solar sites. And they're showing less number of behavior compared to the northern harrier because we only got spotted owl during our evening survey. And then we can get northern harrier during our daytime survey during the winter season. Now we're shifting gear towards the how does the management of protected grassland area impact the abundance and presence of protected grassland species, bird species. So we are already talking a lot about the birds community in general and then protected grassland species, but now we're talking about how does the management actually impact the vegetation in here in terms of grassland habitat in New York. So especially in protected land, so this is filtered only to the site that being protected and managed to support the grassland bird species. To the right, showing you we have burn, and I'm also adding the commercial hay in here just to have comparison between the typical agricultural working grassland, and then burn, fallow, graze, hay, and mowing in here is the type of protected grassland management system has been done there to conserve and protect the grassland bird species. And this is our survey result from 2023. The black one is like mowing, and it's totally different from haying, and then also commercial hay, and then burn. It's very great to see that the commercial hay and the haying that being done in the protected grassland by manager is actually the same and similar type of vegetation. And then this is the 2024. Again, we see differences in terms of management towards the vegetation composition. We see the blue commercial hay is totally different from mowing and totally different from burning activity. And 2025, again, we see especially commercial hay is totally different from the burning and totally different from fallow periods. And then even interestingly, different from haying type of management in the protected grassland. I also want to show why the map is like this because some of the site that is fallow in 2023, they getting burned in 2024, and they may be hay in 2025. So one site in the protected management can experiencing different type of management throughout the year, and then the rundown or the residue of that management can carry over to the next. But it's still good to see an evidence of differences in management, even in that year, actually influencing the type of vegetation you are seeing in your field. Now we are looking at again, trying to relate the grassland bird abundance on protected lands based on the type of management. The first in the y-axis is the commercial hay. This is the type of working grassland. I'm adding it here just to compare with the hay, mowing, graze, burn, and fallow that is applied by management in the protected grassland area. So we have the most abundant one is actually, interestingly, for grassland birds, the 11 obligate species is actually in the grazing area. This is actually in Finger Lake National Forest. They have grazing grassland system where they're using cattle from local farmers and they allow them to graze there. So it's interesting to see it's having the highest. And then the hay, the burn, and the fallow is about the same. And then the lowest one is actually mowing. But none of them, to be fair, none of them are very, very low. And then it's not really like none of them, like not one is bad, if I might say, in terms of like number of protected species in the management type. Now we are trying to relate that to the impact of the management towards bobolink, eastern meadowlark, and savanna sparrow. For bobolink, for example, it seems like the bobolink is having much more significant in the fallow type of land, and then the less number of bobolink is actually in commercial hay type. And then for eastern meadowlark, there's not much more difference because eastern meadowlark actually occupying much more larger area in terms of their territorial size. We don't see much of them because differences because even when we are doing point count, there's less number of them individually compared to the bobolink in the same patch of habitat. And for savanna sparrows, so we're getting most of them, like higher number of them in the grazing area in the protected grassland. So this is showing us the pattern of the number of most abundant species actually come from the savanna sparrow because we have huge number of them in the grazing system of protected grassland. So what is our takeaways? I'm going to go back again into our question that we have in the beginning. We're trying to assessing the impact of solar energy to grassland birds in breeding season. First, there is an evidence of avian community differences between solar habitat, grassland, and protected grassland, as we're showing that more of them are in the protected grassland and working grassland. And we're seeing still high diversity value of protected and working grassland. In the past, New York State has a LEAP, landowner incentive program, where the people who own the hayfield, they get extra money to delay their haying. This is probably also what make the grassland species still can able to survive in there, but further research is needed to see how viable this for them in terms of working grassland activity. And then we're seeing an evidence of spillover effect of grassland birds in solar and solar adjacent. Then the adjacent sites near to the solar. And number two, what we are assessing the impacts of solar energy development on avian assemblages and grassland bird in the non-breeding season, which is winter season. Again, we're seeing the differentiation for avian community during winter season, and then differentiation for raptor community, clearly separating different type of community, and then protected raptor species, northern harrier and short-eared owl, significantly less present in solar sites. What is actually implied to us? So if we think again about the protected grassland will not getting converted, but then the working grassland will get converted. So we will have a chance to lose these grassland species that still abundant and occupying the privately owned working grassland. And number three, by comparing the current best management practice for grassland bird conservation, we're seeing the evidence of management impacts to vegetation community that driving the structure of what type of birds actually and the community there. And then we are also seeing species-specific management importance. We're showing that it's different for bobolink and for savanna sparrow and for eastern meadowlark, the type of management that will benefiting them. And then there's much more actually vegetation variables that we are collected, but for the sake of this presentation, we are only choosing those general type of management. And that is all. We are very thankful for our partners, state agency partners, academic mentors, and collaborators. Want to give shout out for New York DC collaborators, Matthew, Heidi, Abigail, Abby, and everyone in here, agency, nonprofits, energy partners. We're very thankful also for Land Trust that giving us chances to go inside and collect the data, and then Cornell team. And I also want to give shout out to my project partner, Timothy Boycott, that is not here today, but feel free to send us email if you have any question. And this is just my last slide, and thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Thanks, Chifos. I'll just provide a few concluding remarks and mention a bit about some future directions of the research. So this is sort of we're scratching the surface here. We're digging deeper in terms of the analyses of what results have been presented, but we're also trying to get a better understanding through, for example, methods such as spot mapping, the behavioral aspects, and also the locations. So when you consider this idea of yeah, there are grassland birds in solar facilities, you know, there seem to be some edge effects. And so that's something we're going to be looking into with our spot mapping data, our behavioral data, looking at movement from, say, a solar adjacent patch into you know, adjacent into solar facilities, right? So the idea is that, you know, grassland birds may be using solar facilities, but we need more information in terms of, are they breeding in there or not? What are they doing in there? And how is that interfacing with the grand scheme and patch dynamics and, Does a solar facility actually constitute hard edge like say a forest would for grassland birds? And then we're also going to be leveraging the spot mapping data to better understand territory densities and where they're occurring on the landscape for a few select grassland bird species. And I think that's going to shed a lot of light, getting more towards fitness, right? And so a lot of what we can do right now is say, are they in there or not? How many are there? Future directions could be more detailed analyses. Should they be in there enough to say, well, what are they doing in there? That's when the management comes into play. I saw a few questions in the chat. The reason why we're looking at management is twofold. One, at a landscape level, that we believe that we can contribute some valuable information totally outside of solar in terms of grassland bird conservation in the Northeast. But then also, how might it interface with solar? So solar facilities can be mowed, they can be grazed, but is grazing different in a solar facility than it is in an area without solar? We have cattle grazing that we've assessed. A lot of the solar grazing, most of it in the Northeast or all of it, is sheep. So, there are some similarities. There's not going to be any prescribed fire in solar facilities, things like that. So it's interesting to think about, and we're digging a bit deeper into that as well. Trifosa did an amazing job. I saw some shout outs. Always impressive. Tim and Trifosa have done an amazing job with this project, and we're looking forward to the analysis and writing stages. We'll be getting some papers out, sharing information as much as possible. And I'll leave it with this idea of let's talk some more, but these best management practices, grasslands, are really good for certain species of imperiled grassland birds. However, working lands also are showing a high value for these grassland birds that are of conservation concern. That's where the land trust stuff can really come into play. We also see that grassland birds will use and maybe breed in solar adjacent sites. So it's not necessarily that there's displacement that extends out miles, right? Like, although it might for some species of raptors in particular, but the idea is that these lands that are adjacent or nearby to solar facilities could have value for grassland birds strung together on the landscape in interesting ways could be high conservation value. So I think that's important to note because that would point towards this idea of prioritization of land acquisitions in a strategic fashion that would serve to promote grassland birds that don't necessarily have to be, 5,000 acre grassland swaths that are managed by state agencies, right? And so the idea is that there's potential for kind of more strategic conservation initiatives on private lands that could be converted to solar or not. Regardless, we're seeing that they do indeed hold value for grassland birds. So I'll leave it at that. I think Katie's gonna provide our emails in the chat. We're totally happy to get up with y'all, talk some more, share our results. Our papers are available publicly in various ways. So feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Trifosa. That was excellent. And you offered such great insight into better really understanding bird ecology, these interactions between bird ecology, solar, working lands. Brought me back to my grassland bird days. So I know you're clocking miles of walking out there. All these maps that look how easy you walked along a lot. So I'm appreciating that too. You and Timothy. And I'd like to open the floor. We have plenty of time for questions and discussion. I saw a few come through, but at the same time, we're going to share your contact info, Steve, Trufosa, and Timothy's, as well as Sarah and myself, just for anyone who has to boogie now, but want to reach out or get in touch. We will also follow up an email and share the recording and some other resources. But with that, I did see some questions come through in the chat, and I think Meg has the skinny on that, and we'll kind of open it up from there.
One of the questions that came in from Jesse was, does the grassland decline data allow analysis by type of loss, for instance, by reforestation, conversion to crop, or development?
Yeah, I can hop in on that. And Trifosa can provide more detail. So Jesse and Andrew's question with relation to the grassland change, that those are not our data. That was from a previous, that's another product, and Trifosa could provide information on that in terms of what resolution there might be. But that was just to kind of set the stage that we're losing these grassland bird habitats over time. But I think I don't know if it was the USDA product, but yeah, I'm not sure to the extent that it could be manipulated. So Trifosa, I don't know if you want to just provide a quick response to that.
Yeah, it's actually from the USDA Department of Agriculture. So they are looking at how many of these actually growing back because being abandoned as agricultural land. So because it's most of them are like non-native species actually, and then most of them are like returning back into the forest. But that is a very good question in terms of like, can we actually tease out a part of what type of land that is being converted into when they're being lost in those years. So most of them are returning back into forest, and we haven't like really looked into details. That will be another interesting research point. So yeah, that's what I can provide more, but it's really just to show how much the grassland habitat extent has been lost since 1992, and then we're using that USDA database map to show how it's like really statewide, and then also how the trend now, the abandoning agricultural farm has making some of these grassland habitat returning back into forests, because that is the maximum vegetation type of you will find if you leave your land undisturbed in New York State, basically.
Were there others that came through, Meg?
Yes, another one from Ray. Is there any consideration for monitoring ecological traps regarding populations on the working grasslands as years go on?
Yeah, I can provide the short answer, the sad, realistic current situation. And then Trifosa could maybe talk about the science of it all. But basically, the short answer is long-term monitoring and research is needed. However, we currently do not have funds to continue the project beyond the 3 years that we have sampled. But of course, this concept of ecological traps is really interesting. Trifosa can expound upon it some more. Right now, we're trying to understand, are they in there or not? And is it possible for, there are many like, desert kit fox, right? I have studies out in the desert Southwest on BLM lands. They're supposed to be a desert specialist. They love solar. So it's like, there's things that happen where there are species that can live inside of solar facilities. Now, the question is that possible with grassland birds? Now, if they are breeding in there, that brings into question, how is it possible to manage for grassland birds inside of solar facilities that need to have vegetation that is routinely maintained, and so on? So the first question is, are they breeding in there or not? And if so, over time, it could be an ecological trap if, for example, the mowing regime is leading to continual nest loss. Trifosa, I don't know if you have anything to add to that in terms of, I know we talked about this before, not necessarily the idea of needing more funds for long-term monitoring, but more so the science of it, what we've discussed. Maybe you have something to add there.
Yeah, I think Steve, you already like answered that fully, because yeah, it's really we have 3 years project being funded, and then we apply for another one. I'm not sure about that part, but we are also interested in seeing and actually doing more monitoring for ecological traps, but our current capacity just not available for that, and it will be interesting to work on that topic in the future. But like Steve already mentioned, we're also doing spot mapping, and we compare the spot mapping between protected grassland, working grassland, and the adjacent to the solar site. So I think the spot mapping is even more detailed data being collected because you can tell is the territory size is different between boboling that is in working grassland and boboling that is occupying protected grassland, and then boboling that may be in adjacent grassland. So, and we also have the behavioral code, if they're doing courtship, feeding their young, if they're carrying food, if they're carrying the nest materials. We actually do try to find the nest for this grassland bird species. This is a quite collaborative project with Kristen Mallon from Brockport, SUNY Brockport, but we still need to look into detail more into that because it's quite a sensitive type of species that if you disturb them once, some of the species are not going to build their nest again. So there need to be more precaution on doing those specific analysis. And hopefully with our spot mapping data, and then also especially the recording, passive acoustic monitoring data, we can have more, like their vocalization is the show of their figure, their breeding behavior, because they sing, they need to also train their juvenile. And then if we can dig down more into that down the line to be able to answer these ecological traps, because it's already showing some kind of interesting findings just based on the savanna sparrow and bobolink comparison in terms of their mean focalization. We see the disturbance in savanna sparrow, but they go up again, bouncing back up again, and then try to breed again. But this is becoming a problem if you are a bobolink because you will only breed once. So it's quite ecological trap, like you say.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that the nest searches for grassland birds are notoriously difficult to do, even in the best case scenarios, let alone in a solar facility. So we are trying to leverage the extensive amount of bioacoustic data to see if we can dig a little deeper, train the algorithms to recognize different call types and so on, to just see, like, are there juvenile birds and that we're recording inside a solar facility with regards to grassland birds and things like that. So we are trying to get at that because if it's complicated, like if they're actually breeding in there, then that changes things, like in terms of whether over time it would become an ecological trap. And so that's something that we are interested in doing. See, Justin has a question.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, great presentation. Thanks so much. We're fascinated about this whole solar world. And I apologize if I miss it, but I did want to follow up and just ask, because you've done a lot of point count data, abundance, presence, absence. If you guys even anecdotally saw any evidence of nesting of any of our grassland obligates within the solar arrays, was a nest ever found for any of these species, or was a female seen delivering food into the grass, or was there any true indication of a nesting event inside a solar array? Out of curiosity.
Yeah, that's good. Good question, Justin. Using our point count, what we're seeing actually, they are actively foraging, especially for the eastern meadowlark, bobolink, and savanna sparrow, but we haven't seen them actually, like carrying what like nest, and then we haven't seen their nest inside the solar yet. But we don't know what will happen in the future because they might be able to adapt. That is a probability. But we found several times American robin nests inside the solar underneath the panels. We also saw several times eastern bluebird nests under the panel. So it's kind of like interesting finding, but because that was not our main, like we're not searching the nest. Or this is also something that I need to mention to everyone in here. We are very grateful we can do some of solar that we go inside, but it's very hard to get permission. This is very hard project. So we even we originally want to do before after control intervention type of back-key design, where we already have some sites that actually before it's being built, and when it's being built during our timeline as PhD student, and then when it's being progressing as being built. So it's really hard to get contact and then to get an actual like direct impact that will be much more stronger in terms of like, yes, this is the number of impact you get if you convert your land into the solar. So right now we're kind of like comparing different type of lands treatments. And then and since like it's not easy to get inside the solar, but we're very thankful nevertheless because of safety reason. And also we are not allowed to spend most time inside the solar site because it's becoming a huge challenge because we need to coordinate with different type of people or site manager in solar that taking care of the site. So and most of that site is also like 4 or 5 hours drive from Ithaca. And then when we are there, we can only spend less than 30 minutes basically. So we can only install the recorder, doing vegetation sampling, and then we're trying our best to also do point count because the summer point count is only 5 minutes, kind of type of sampling, so we can do it quickly. But it's like, yeah, I think Katie mentioned that it's quite a hike. We're really wanting to do. I think I also saw the grazing data inside the solar. Will you be able to do something like that? We're willing to do that, but it's just like very hard to get inside. And then there's also NDA, non-disclosure agreement, kind of we have to sign on. And just for all the solar companies that giving us permission, we're very thankful of, but it's really hard to get an actual like total access. Our dream like research is like totally go inside, totally search for the nest and getting every data inside the solar itself. So yeah, that's things that I can say.
Yeah.
Um,
Good job, Trifosa. That was a thorough answer. So Justin, I would say we need to look a little more. There's an inherent bias towards we have more like behavioral point data coming from the spot mapping and the spot mapping and the point counts. We have behavioral data. Now we can do that in some solar facilities, but not all. Whereas for all the other treatments, we have unrestricted access and we can, do the point counts and things like that. But I think, or do the behavioral stuff. But in general, no, we're not seeing evidence currently, preliminarily, of any of the 11 grassland bird species of conservation concern by New York State happening inside of solar facilities, but we do need to delve a little bit deeper. Like they will, it's not like they're perching on the fences on the edge of them. They're not seeing solar facilities and flying away and scared, but we're not necessarily seeing them breeding in there, or any, direct evidence of that, with the caveat that we have fewer sites that we can actually measure that at for solar versus relative to the other treatments. And I also wanted to mention that Trifosa brought up a good point. Everything we're presenting right now, all the data that we have right now, is based on community scale solar, right? So these are like, 100-acre solar facilities, things of that nature. We have before data for many, for a solar project, I would say, I would use the word many solar facilities that have not been built yet in New York that are going to be a lot bigger, right? So there's potential for there to be differences between industrial scale solar facilities and these community scale solar facilities. Right now, what we're presenting on is the community scale. We have the before for the industrial scale. Maybe we can get some more funds potentially from renewable energy industry. Like we're routinely funded by energy industry too. Like it's all unbiased research. They're interested in this too. But I think the thing is that, you'll see a bird nest in a solar facility and they say birds are in there, we're good. And it's like, well, that's a robin's nest. Like I have one of those on my house and my kid like is 5 feet away throwing rocks at it. Like, it's different than not all nests are created equally. And then same thing, like we see harriers flying through. Well, that's true, but when you compare that to other treatment types, it's actually a lot less. So it's not necessarily that they're not there, they're not using the spaces. It's more about, can we delve a little deeper to understand mechanisms, to understand not just whether they're there, but what they're doing. And that's what we're hoping to do moving forward. So I think the ARUs are going to be really important for that, because we do have a bunch of those inside of solar facilities. The problem is it's just a bit harder to go and delve deeper beyond just, occurrence and species level occupancy, but we're working on that. And then in terms of the grazing, I do just want to mention that we've had some research come out of my group that is looking at solar grazing with sheep and how you can achieve these synergies with, the grazing. We have grazing density as a response variable, and is there a point at which, you can achieve these synergies? And so it is possible to like maintain vegetation with sheep while also like forage quality is maintained and then sheep health is increased. So we are seeing that. But then we also see that, for example, if you want to maintain pollinator habitat, your grazing density needs to actually be lower, right, than the threshold for just looking at animal health. So the next step could be to look at birds. However, it becomes a lot more difficult to do that with these community scale solar facilities, because a lot of them, a bird can fly in and out of there relatively easily. Their territory size is larger and intersecting with things versus like insects. We know we can pretty much associate that in some cases with the solar facility itself. So there are some challenges associated with that. But I think particular to grassland birds, if it is the case that grassland birds are actively using and breeding, using habitat and breeding inside of solar facilities, and I think a natural extension would be to have treatments where you have sites that are mowed, but with the LIP program type timing, and then grazed by sheep, and seeing what the interface might be there. But again, it doesn't really make sense to do that if they're not even in there to begin with, right? So we're trying to do this in a stepwise fashion. I wanted to get to Julie's question real quick, and I guess we're running out of time, but this is a great one for Trifosa to answer because she's really good at this, and it's a great question. So Trifosa, I don't know if you can see it in the chat from Julie Richburg, but talking about the timing of the land conversion and then the patch dynamics, because I forgot to mention that we are looking at landscape level buffers. So maybe we can have Trifosa expound upon that real quick.
Yeah, Julie, thank you for your question. Thank you, Steve. So we basically also using the NLCD data and then also the row cover type of data, and then starting from 100 meters, 500 meters, 5,000 meters. And then also we will run an analysis looking at the territory size of each birds, because that will affect how their territory size with the landscape level covariates, also the spatial extent of what actually is surrounding the area that they are present or where we are seeing them. So each of our ARUs are being paired with point count, and at the same time, in each of our ARU means acoustic recording unit. In each of them, we actually also have the vegetation sample. So we have high level data of vegetation information, but also we have a spatial extent of the landscape configuration surrounding the area. I also want to mention that the land manager are very kindly sharing with us what type of land it was in the past. I was mentioning in 2023, maybe they're being burned, 2024, they're being hay. It's something that they try to improve or increase, or making sure that there is much more variation in terms of management type. So we have that information, and we will incorporate that into like more modeling side of it. Like, what will you expect if you're doing this type of management in this year? What will you expect the type of vegetation you'll see next year, the type of birds that you will be seeing? Will you having higher chance to get more abundance of the 11 obligate grassland species? So yeah, we are looking and thinking about that for the future analysis.
Thank you. Thanks, Trifosa. Thanks, Steve. We're at time, which I hate to cut us off, but I know people have other things to do as well, and we will follow up. Maybe I think I saw the contact info in the for Steve, Trifosa, and Timothy. Can put that in the chat again. We'll be following up with everyone with this recording. I know some people couldn't make it today last minute. And just, yeah, thanks for speaking with us today. This is totally fascinating. We wish you best of luck with your continued research and funding for that research. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Again, please reach out to me and Sarah if you have any questions or ideas for future programs. And Sarah, I don't know if you have any concluding thoughts that you want to share as well, but
No, I know we're over time, so I just wanted to say thanks to everyone for joining us today. This is fantastic, and thanks so much to Steve and Trifosa for sharing your incredible research, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Great.
yeah, thank
Thanks,
you
y'all.
all.
Thank
Great
you
job,
all.
Trifosa.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone.
All
See
right.
ya.
Bye.
Take care.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.